They say if you hold your breath long enough beneath a birthing moon, you can still hear the sound of the first stitch, the one not made with thread, but with memory. It was the spring of 1838 when the soil began to turn soft beneath the chapel's S foundation in West Hollow. Not from rain, not from rot, but as if something beneath it had started to breathe. The Carroway Sisters arrived that year without warning, without family, without name. No records, no carriage, not even footprints in the morning frost. Just three figures cloaked in wool and silence, standing at the edge of the field where no crops ever grew. They took residence in a forgotten mill house, leaned so sharply it looked as if it were bowing. Locals called it the Spindle House. They didn't ask why. Each sister moved with precision, as if carrying out steps long rehearsed. The eldest, Eunice, never blinked. The middle one, Esther, always held her left arm tight against her ribs as though cradling something invisible. And the youngest, Maribeth, smiled too often and never when appropriate. The first to call for them was a widow named Della Payne. Her son had taken ill, bones flaring red beneath his skin, mouth locked open in a scream that never came. The doctor brought opium. The reverend brought prayer. But neither could stop the boy's body from swelling, from splitting along his chest like a mouth learning to speak. Della opened her door at dawn to find a wooden bowl on her step, still warm, filled with black milk and braided reeds. The sister stood beyond her gate. She never invited them in. She didn't have to. That night, the boy quieted. His breathing returned. But he never opened his eyes again. Instead, he hummed faintly, a lullaby Della had never taught him but somehow recognized. A hymn she thought had been lost in her grandmother's voice. Rumors grew fast. No one saw the sister shop, yet their lanterns never dimmed. Midwives from neighboring towns whispered of herbs not native to this land birthroot, curled in the shape of an ear, bark that bled like afterbirth. By midsummer, they had replaced the town doctor for all but the proud and the pious. But even the reverend's own wife, heavy with child, called for them beneath her breath when labor turned sideways. And the sisters came, not through the door, but through shadow. Not with water, but with wax. They placed bowls beneath the bed, stitched talismans into the linens, and when the baby finally emerged, it was silent, not dead watching, eyes already open, fingers already clenched. Some began to wonder if these children were born or merely returned. A carpenter named Ellis Root was the first to confront them openly. Said his niece had changed after her delivery, refused to sleep at night, wept at the sight of mirrors, grew teeth too quickly. He found hair twisted into knots beneath her crib, knots he didn't tie. Claimed the child whispered in her sleep. Not words, names. He followed the sisters to their home one evening, heart full of brimstone and scripture. Only one returned. His niece, that is. She was found on her mother's porch, sitting upright in her swaddling mouth full of ash. Her eyes had turned to glass, and she never moved again. Ellis? He was never seen. But 3 nights later, the sound of a saw echoed across the hills slow, deliberate, though no trees were felled. Just silence afterward, and a cradle nailed to the chapel door. The mayor called a council, not to judge, but to understand. The town's stillbirth rate had dropped, but so had something else: sunlight in certain parts of the parish, warmth on the skin, even time itself. Clocks stopped working inside the spindle house. Dogs wouldn't bark past its gate, and the air smelled faintly, always like sour milk and rosewater. The council sent a deacon, alone, with a gift of thanks. A lamb pure white. He never made it past the porch. The animal did. Returned by morning, fully swaddled, stitched at the neck, its bleat replaced with a low hum. Still, the people kept calling on the sisters. Because when the womb tore, and the blood refused to stop, when the breath left before the cry came, only the Carroways could reach past whatever veil lingered and pull something back. Not always what was expected, not always what was wanted, but always something. And then came the birth of Lena Gray's twins. The labor was long, unnatural. Her screams stretched into silence, and her husband swore the wind itself stopped. The sisters arrived without being summoned. They brought a mirror, a bundle of thorns, and a length of ivory thread. No one saw them deliver the children, only the aftermath. 2 infants lay side by side in the cradle, identical in form, but one had no belly button, no mark of separation. It simply watched, blinked once, and turned its head toward the ridge. The mirror cracked. The husband tried to take the child to the church for blessing, but the doors would not open. The font was dry, and when he turned back, only one child remained in the cradle. The other left behind a thread, still warm, still pulsing. From that day, the townsfolk began whispering a phrase they didn't remember learning. Not all births come from the womb. Some come back through the stitch. If you're still watching, comment the phrase. The thread remembers twice below. It means you reawake to what most forget. And if this story pulls something in you, like it is remembering for you, tap like, share, and subscribe. There are more truths waiting. It was after the Lena Gray birth that the air in West Hollow shifted, not just in scent or weight, but in direction. Wind that once swept from the pines began to curl instead, circling tight around the chapel, around door frames, beneath cradles, and through keyholes like breath not taken, but returned. People no longer counted their days by sunlight or moonrise. Instead, they watched the threads. At first, it was simple. Pale fibers braided into porch railings, caught in windowsills, hanging from tree branches like forgotten ribbons. But they grew thicker, more deliberate. One family awoke to find a lattice of silk-like thread stretching across their baby's room, connecting crib to ceiling, ceiling to floor, woven into a cradle-shaped net. The child was unharmed, silent, smiling. By autumn, no one dared speak the sisters' names aloud. To name them, it was whispered, was to call them. And to call them was to admit you'd begun to hear the stitching. A boy named Ren Colley went missing the first night the fog refused to lift. Just 12 years old, last seen drawing circles in the dirt behind the mill house with a stick shaped like a bone. His mother found a single sock twisted into a spiral outside their door, stuffed with 3 teeth, none of them his. The sheriff organized a search, but the dogs refused to cross the orchard. That night, 3 cradles appeared at the edge of the cornfield, rocking gently. One held the boy's hat. The others were empty, but warm. And still, the town did nothing, because babies born under the sisters' care lived. That was all most dared to ask for, even if they came back different. A woman named Lydia Marin gave birth alone in the night. She said she never called for help, never screamed, never pushed. Just a hum, low, rhythmic, like a wheel turning. She awoke with blood on her legs and a child at her breast, eyes open, mouth closed. The child would not cry, it only watched. And whenever anyone said its name, Jonas, it blinked twice, as if correcting them. The Reverend warned the town. He preached of false life and stitched souls, quoted scripture that did not exist, claimed the Carroways were not healers, but historians of the flesh, sewing back what had never been fully erased. They do not birth, he said. They recall. He vanished within the week. His shoes were found side by side on the church steps, laces tied with milk thread. His Bible remained on the pulpit, but every page had been sewn shut with black hair. That winter, silence fell like snow. Babies were born without sound, without motion, yet with eyes that followed shadows across the ceiling. One couple found their newborn standing in its crib. Not walking, just standing, balanced perfectly, staring at the corner where the wind never touched. Whispers thickened. Mothers confessed to hearing voices in the nursery, not their children's, but their own. singing lullabies they didn't remember knowing. Fathers began placing bowls of salt beneath windows, mirrors beneath cradles, knives in door frames. But still the sisters came. They came when the birth was hard, when the cord wrapped too tight, when the heartbeat slowed. They came without lantern, without knock, without permission. And afterward, no matter the outcome, they always left something behind. A thread tied to the bedpost, a mark stitched into the linens, a bowl filled with blackened wax, still warm. A schoolteacher named Clara Bell tried to resist. She was 6 months with child and swore she'd never let them near. She read from books, prepared herbs, made charms. But when the time came and the pain struck, she bit her own hand rather than cry out. It didn't matter. They came anyway. The next morning, Clara was found asleep in her bed, bloodless but smiling. Her body held no signs of trauma, just a bundle beside her swaddled in linen, stitched shut. When they opened it, they found not a child, but a waxen figure molded with a perfect face. Clara's face. The mayor ordered a census. He wanted proof. Proof of who was born, who remained. But the names would not stay written. Ink bled from the parchment, forming spiral cradles and concentric eyes. Every tally vanished overnight. Only the number 3 remained scratched into the wood of his desk, burned into the curtains, scrawled onto his own mirror in breath fog. When his wife went into labor 2 months early, he sent for the town doctor. Not the sisters. He boarded the doors, salted the walls, read psalms. The child was born screaming. But it wasn't his wife's scream that followed. It was the cry of another woman older, cracked, full of salt and stitch. The mayor stumbled from the room to find a trail of thread leading to the fireplace. Inside, a cradle burned slowly, despite the hearth being cold. His child was missing. His wife's hands were sewn closed. That night, the bell atop the chapel rang for the first time in years. Once, twice, then a third time, then silence. And in the silence, the sound of rocking. Not feet, not cribs, but thread, drawing shut the mouth of something never meant to speak. If this feels like something you've remembered, not learned, comment, "The thread remembers" twice below. Enjoying this descent into forgotten truths? Tap like, share, and subscribe, because what comes next has already happened. By the thaw of 1841, even the birds had forgotten how to sing. Dogwood Hollow no longer resembled a town. Gardens bore no root, only husks of things that grew from memory. Children no longer blinked in unison. Infants no longer cried. And the mothers, those who still called themselves such, spoke in riddles passed down from dreams. The Carroway Sisters were seen more often now, though never together. One would pass through the orchard with bare feet and closed eyes. Another would kneel beside a drying well, humming to something beneath. The youngest stood for hours by the schoolhouse steps, holding nothing in her arms, yet rocking gently, as if lulling something unseen. Some townsfolk tried to flee, packed wagons with salt and silver, Bibles stitched into the lining of shawls. But the roads never led out. They twisted, looped, and returned to the same crooked house leaning toward the ridge. Always the same house. Always the same scent-warm milk, rust, and wet linen. One man tried to burn it. Amos Fay, a logger by trade, brought kerosene and a sermon in his throat. He doused the walls, lit a match, and watched the flames bloom. They rose fast, eager, swallowing the porch, the windows, the roof. But there was no smoke, no heat. And by dawn, the house stood untouched, the same flame now dancing behind its windows, calm and unmoving. Amos' boots were found beside the chapel gate, soles soaked in milk. Inside each, a pinnacone, wet and pulsing. By midsummer, the babies began naming themselves. When asked, they would turn their heads and whisper a word no one could place. Not Latin, not known tongue, but ancient, wet-sounding, full of pressure and thread. One child answered to Mem, another to Ulri, a third to nothing at all, only the sound of breath reversed. A merchant woman named Ida Bell arrived from the south, unaware of the Regis curse. She carried a newborn in her arms, a girl wrapped in blue, eyes shut tight. She asked for shelter. They gave her the chapel loft. That night, the baby wept louder than any child in memory, so loud that dust fell from rafters, and every cradle in town rocked once. In the morning, Ida was gone. In her place, a bundle wrapped in damp cloth, stitched with a Carroway seal. 3 loops knotted tight. Inside, not a child, but a spool of pale thread soaked in afterbirth. It pulsed. The chapel doors would not open again. Windows steamed from within. The pews turned themselves to face the wall. A girl named Eleonora, just 7, began sleepwalking, always toward the ridge. Her father tied bells to her wrists. Her mother placed pins beneath the rug. Still, she vanished one morning, shoes placed neatly beneath the birthing tree. In her bed, a doll made of moss and salt, swaddled in her nightdress, smiling with a mouth that had no seam. The thread spread. It wove through door hinges, through corn husks, through hair. A mother found it inside her daughter's ear, pulled a full hand's length before it snapped, leaving behind a faint hum that never ceased. And then the midwife ledger appeared, nailed to the chapel door with a pin of polished bone. It bore no names, only dates, all upcoming, all marked with the sign of the cradle, a list of children not yet born, or not meant to be. The townsfolk gathered once more, desperate for order. They lit candles, drew salt circles, called for help from the next county, but the letters returned unopened. The candles melted into wax with tiny teeth. The salt circles broke, not stepped through, but unwound, and the children began to sing, not in voices of their own, but with the exact tones of their mothers. Harmonies stitched together with memory. A boy sang with the voice of his dead grandmother. A toddler hummed a funeral dirge from a war that hadn't yet happened. One infant wept with the sound of boiling water, and still the Carroway Sisters watched. Hester stitched sigils into the bark of trees. Eunice placed bowls beneath empty cradles. Maribeth stared into wells, listening, always listening. When the mayor's daughter gave birth in silence, alone at the riverbank, no one dared speak of it. The child was found breathing underwater, eyes open, lips sewn shut with ivy. They buried it beneath the old willow. The earth refused it 3 times. By the end of that season, 3 infants had vanished. No sign of struggle, just their cribs still warm, and a line of thread leading from the sheets out the window. A hunter tracked one of the trails. It led him deep into the ridge, past the old boundary stone. He returned days later, barefoot, mouth stuffed with reeds, humming the lullaby his mother used to sing, though she died before he was born. He didn't speak. He didn't sleep. He just listened. To what? He never said, but the rocking grew louder. In the night, in the soil, in the bones of the town, something was being cradled, and it was remembering. If this feels older than memory, older than known, comment, "The thread remembers," twice below. You're almost through the veil. If this story gripped you, hit like, share, and subscribe, because the 4th chapter is where everything unravels. By the winter of 1842, Dogwood Hollow no longer spoke aloud. The town's language had become stitching threads pulled across window panes, braided through iron fence posts, wrapped around crib legs like veins refusing to rot. Even time had softened, sagged like old wool hung too long in rain. People forgot how long they had been there. Some forgot their names, but none forgot the Carroway Sisters. No one saw them enter houses anymore. They didn't have to. One morning, Every home awoke to find a bowl at its doorstep. Not filled, but empty polished bone, carved with 3 concentric rings and a single stitch at the bottom. The message was clear. Something had been taken, and something else would be returned. What? No one asked aloud. Infants no longer arrived with labor. They simply appeared, swaddled, silent, placed in beds already made. Their skin was pale, their eyes already open, their breaths slow and long, as if inhaling for the first time in centuries. A man named Revelin Dorn tried to name one. He held the child in the chapel's ruins and spoke a name passed down through 4 generations. The child blinked once, then let out a sound, not a cry, not a cough, but a groan, deep and layered, like wind pushed through gravel. The next day, every family that had once named a child that name found their doors marked in black milk, their cradles gone, and still they stayed, because leaving was no longer an option. Wagons broke down at the ridge's edge. Wheels turned to ash, roads bent. The trees whispered like lips pressing against glass, and the town, stitched tightly into the soil, began to hum. Maribeth Carroway was seen again that February, alone, barefoot, her arms wrapped in a shawl embroidered with old midwife sigils no one had sewn in 100 years. She wandered into the schoolhouse at dusk, placed a bundle on the teacher's desk, and whispered, "Not all wombs end." Then she turned and vanished into the fog, leaving behind a quiet so absolute the chalk cracked. The bundle contained a journal, leather-bound, sealed with hair and wax. Its pages were blank until nightfall. Then words appeared, one by one, names of unborn children, places not mapped, herbs no one had seen grow, and lullabies written in reversed stave. Those who read it too long forgot the faces of their loved ones. One boy read a single page and began speaking backward, even in sleep. The town buried the book. The next morning, it returned on the chapel steps, dry, humming. Then came the final birth. A girl named Marian Doyle, whose womb had never quickened, whose voice had never risen above a whisper, was found in her cabin cradling a child wrapped in funeral linens. She said nothing, but her neighbors swore her eyes had turned solid black. The child breathed once every minute, and with each breath, frost grew across the floor. Not ice frost made of tiny threads, curling, reaching. The town physician declared it a miracle. The apothecary wept. The reverend's widow, now blind, simply said, "It's begun." And it had. That night, the wind changed direction not once, but constantly, curling inward like a thread being tightened. The cradle at the chapel was no longer carved. It had grown. From the soil, from bone, from memory. Its ribs were smooth, its wood wet, and it pulsed softly like something between life and sleep. No one touched it. No one dared. But they knew. The sisters had finished sewing. They had stitched the town shut, sewn silence into its soil, swaddled every breath in threads of memory. Children began walking into the woods at night, returning with herbs no one planted, with teeth not their own. One girl returned with her mouth stitched closed, and her palms burned in the shape of a cradle. She pointed to the sky, where no stars blinked, and then laid down in the center of the town square. She never rose. The sisters were seen once more, all 3, standing in a circle of milk and ash beneath the old birthing tree. Each held a bundle, each humming in a voice not their own. And between them, the ground opened not with a crack, but with a breath, soft, gentle, like a mouth preparing to speak a name that had never been given. Inside the hollow, nothing, just dark threads pulled tight. The people gathered at dawn, not by will, by memory. They stood in rows, children in front, mothers behind, fathers last, each holding something lost: a tooth, a doll, a lock of hair, a name. On Eunice stepped forward. She raised one hand and unspooled a length of thread from her wrist. It shimmered in the light that wasn't sun, and as it stretched, the sky began to hum. Hester whispered, Maribeth wept, and the wind stopped forever. The cradle pulsed once more, then grew still. A silence descended that wasn't emptiness, but fullness. The kind of silence only known in the moment before a child draws its first breath. And then, without warning, the Carroway house vanished. Not with sound, not with light. It simply was, and then was not. In its place, a depression in the earth shaped like a womb. Smooth, hair-lined, warm. It steamed faintly in the morning frost, carrying a scent all remembered but none named. The people did not speak of what had happened. They never would. But they stopped naming their children. They stopped marking graves. They stopped planting anything that bore fruit. They left out bowls at their doors, not filled, not empty, just waiting. Waiting to be remembered. And beneath the soil, something rocked. Not in pain, not in hunger, but in rhythm. A cradle that would never still. If you've watched till the end, you're no longer just a viewer. You're a witness. Comment. The thread remembers, twice to mark your initiation. Like this story? Then like, share, and subscribe, because the Forgotten Rites has only just begun.